Welcome to the Baptist Reformation, where we do the work of recovering the Reformation in Baptist thought. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Baptist Reformation podcast. Guys, this has been a great little series that I have had the privilege to do. I think this is going to be the last one, at least in this series formally. I don't have a problem with going further and doing more things on race and how our theology relates to the racialism of our day, how it rebuts it, and then what a biblical view of humanity actually is, and a biblical view of unity, so on and so forth. I don't, in the context of this big discussion, which has really kicked off, or has been, I guess, inflamed rather, by the recent MLK 50 conference. So, but this is the last in this video series that I'm going to do. This is the last video in this series that I'm going to do. So, move on to some other things. I've got a debate coming up in June that I'm preparing for, so I've got to devote time to that. Of course, my wife and I just had our first son, so I'd like to spend time with them. I'd like to read. I'd like to work on homework. I'd like to go to work and make money, things like that. So I'm going to wrap up this thing with this is a statistical look at the situation. I'm going to be relying on a black economist named Thomas Sowell, and another economist, African American gentleman that you could refer to is Walter Williams, but I don't rely on him as much in the blog post that I've written already, and I'm going to be going off that blog post, which is now published on the website. By the way, I decided to, since over the last 2 months, I have really written quite a bit and made some videos about race, and I need to stop saying race because I don't want to adopt that ideology, but about this discussion, about the movement, about the narrative, about questions concerning the allegation or the notion of white privilege, things of that nature, and I've decided to collect all of that in one place. So it's going to be available on the Baptist Reformation. That's reformbaptist.com, REFORM, not REFORMED, but just reform, not reformed, but reformbaptist.com. I'm going to make it available on there. It'll be on the Facebook page. It's going to have all of the articles that I've written about this subject and all of the videos that I've filmed about this subject, all accessible from one place. So hopefully that'll make things easier for you if you're looking to see what I've said, if you care about what I've said, which would humble me. Then you will be able to go there and see what I've done. Okay, so here I'm going to be talking about statistics, more of an objective look at, as objective, I guess, as we could get at the reality of the situation. A lot of this information I'm getting from the article that I wrote, but I put a lot of I did some research for this one when it comes to statistics. I took some statistics from an economist, i.e. Thomas Sowell. So this article contains that information, and it's called Death by Generalization, and then the subtitle is Culpability Further Discussed. I discuss responsibility in the second article, I believe, in that series called Death by Generalization, which is now up on the website. But this is culpability or responsibility further discussed, and so I'm going to be going off Sowell's research, and kind of talk about that for a little bit. Excuse me. The question is, one of the claims of this movement, one of the components, if you will, of the narrative, which we've already talked about in the third episode of this series, one of the components is that of oppression. The black community is oppressed by, in large part by the white community. And basically the structure of economics that has been established is in favor of the white community, and since it's predominantly the white community that has established the structure of things like economics, things like politics, you name it. The capitalistic structure of the United States, of the West, has in large part been developed and maintained by the white man. And because of that, a lot of it, and by the way, what goes along with this is that the black community has been oppressed in the past and has never been able to gain a foothold in this structure, in this system, right? Sometimes you'll hear the word system used. And so the question is, are blacks really held back because of slavery and segregation? Sometimes you will hear it claimed that because of slavery, because of the segregationist movement in the 1950s and 60s, that the civil rights movement sought to counteract, because of these things, black Americans have been held back significantly. And it is this again can go from we just simply need to recognize that this is the case and do something to alleviate it, although that's not necessarily agreed upon what that is, and I can't really hardly ever get an answer out of anyone when I ask as to what that is. So we either need to just recognize it, repent of it, in some cases, the BD, or we need to make reparations. I mean, that's the other end of the spectrum, right? And I think that even when you say like we need to recognize it so that we can begin to fix it, I think even then the tendency is to move towards reparations. But that's another episode. Reparations in some way, shape, or form. So the question is, are blacks really held back because of slavery and segregation, or is there another culprit we need to address? Is there another culprit we need to address? Sowell thinks so. So he quotes the effects, or black, he questions the effects, or the, black poverty, which is the effect, as it relates to its cause. Sowell says, if we wanted to be serious about evidence, we might compare where blacks stood 100 years after the end of slavery with where they stood after 30 years of the liberal welfare state. Okay. Sowell talks more about the liberal welfare state in Basic Economics, which is kind of his magnum corpus. That's his largest body of work, I believe. He talks about it in Intellectuals and Race and Black Rednecks and White Liberals. So there's a source video to this. There's a video that actually was the original kind of clip to pique my interest in what he was saying, which led me to buy two books of his. And it's on YouTube. You can just search Thomas Sowell and Victimology. It's a good video. Sowell goes on to say that in 1960, and this is key, only 22% of black children lived in homes with only one parent. Okay, and I think I brought this up earlier. 22% of black children lived in homes with only one parent. Only 22%. This means 4 out of 5 black children were in homes with both parents. This is in the 1960s. He then goes on to say 30 years later, after what he calls the liberal welfare state, that number had more than tripled. He points out how this tripled figure of black children increasingly living in homes with only one parent was not due to slavery or even segregation, but due to a whole other set of policies. He cites another statistic. In 1993, the number of students who graduated from Dunbar High School in Washington and went on to college was less than it was 60 years earlier, in the midst of the Great Depression. So, in the midst of financial hardship for everyone in the United States of America, more black children were going on, black youths were going on to college from high school, from a prestigious high school like Dunbar High School in Washington State. And that was 60 years earlier than the statistic he cited previous to that. He also mentions Stuyvesant High School in New York, and how in 2012 the number of students who had gained admission into that high school was less than 1/10 of the percentage of those who had gained admission 30 years earlier. And then another observation he makes relates to the housing projects. 100 years after slavery, these neighborhoods did not experience the high crime rates that they do today. So there are other factors, there are other variables involved, independent of any sort of white privilege, supposed white oppression. There are other variables involved here that's causing the black community to be where it is today. That's undeniable. You have to admit that, statistically. You have to admit that at least there are other variables there. Other causes. Some other influences there, aside from something like white oppression or, white privilege. The problem with the movement or the narrative is that it's not going into any of this. It's not even saying like, okay, here are the statistics. Now, we understand that these are the statistics, that some people are throwing out there. But here's some other things to consider along with those statistics. They're not even going that far. They're not bringing any of this up. White privilege is just assumed, and then, oppression is assumed as well. Whether they want to say that or not, that's what they're getting at. There's some form of oppression there from the white community. In this case, in the case of the Gospel Coalition and the MLK 50 Conference, from white evangelicals, from white Christians, brothers and sisters in Christ, there's some sort of oppression there in the church. Evidence is fleeting. Actually, every time you ask someone for evidence, it's in my experience, there's no evidence given. And when you're asking for evidence, you're just blinded, right? So the question really that comes up in light of Sowell's work there is, if slavery and segregation had such long-lasting effects on black Americans, why is there such a sociological decline from early to mid 20th century and on? Why didn't the black communities stay impoverished like they would have been right at the end of slavery in 1863? There's more. I'm gonna keep moving on. And actually, there's a statistic here that I didn't write on, but I'll bring it up anyways. Sowell says we could debate we could debate the cause of that 22% of children who were in parentless homes, but that's really a drop in the bucket. I mean, when you consider what's going on here. The other statistics that were brought up, the other statistic that was brought up in Sowell's stuff was the relationship between blacks, whites, and Asian Americans with respects to home mortgages. And one of somebody will bring up something like mortgage loans, and they'll say, well, whites, are granted twice as many mortgage loans as blacks. How do you explain that? Must be white privilege. Well, not, don't even talk about the fact that there's population-wise, there's more white people in this country than blacks. So of course, it would make sense for there to be more mortgage loans written for whites. Let's not talk about that. Let's also not talk about the fact that whites typically, and this isn't right. It's not prejudiced to say this. It's not racist to say this, but whites typically, statistically, have higher credit scores than people in the black community. Now, I don't believe that has anything to do with the color of people's skin. I think it could have everything to do with culture, but not the color of people's skin. But the thing that really just bursts the bubble on this whole thing, if somebody wants to say, well, whites are given more home loans than black individuals are, Asian Americans are given twice as many mortgage loans as white people are. So is there some sort of Asian American privilege? And by the way, there are still more white people in the United States than there are Asian people. So Asian people are still receiving more mortgage loans than white people are. Here's the thing. Asian Americans statistically have higher credit scores, which is what things like mortgage loans are primarily based upon. They have higher credit scores than white people. It's a culture thing, not a skin color thing. There's all these variables, there's all these factors that play into this that nobody in this movement wants to talk about. None. I mean, they don't even bring it up. They don't even broach the information. Okay. Keep in mind also that when someone's writing a mortgage loan, when a bank writes a mortgage loan, 9 times out of 10 they never see the face of the person they're writing the mortgage loan for. They're looking at credit reports. And they're looking at a name and a social security number. Actually, what the banker is concerned about is the person's name and their credit report. And that's what they look at. Income. They look at income. And I know this because my wife and I are in the process of this right now. And it's hard for me to get a mortgage loan. I mean, it's difficult. There's some hoops you got to jump through. They look at a lot of things before they process a mortgage loan. You have to take into consideration these other variables. You can't just skip to, well, white people have more home loans granted to them than black people do. White privilege. No. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we could look at a whole other gambit of things as well. I can't remember, but it seems like I was going to look at one other. I think Walter Williams brought this up in one of his books, one that I do have on Kindle. In one of his books, he brings this up. Maybe I can find it so I can read it verbatim. Let me pull up my Kindle app. Basically, what he talks about is if you were to take the black community in America, just America alone, and consider it as an aggregate, like consider it as a nation. Let's just take the African American population and then economically speaking, put it, find out where it is as far as nations are concerned economically, see where they land as far as, their aggregate, their income. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. It's taking a little while to load. Yada, 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 yada. I'll just tell you. If it loads, I'll read it. But for now, I'll just paraphrase. If the black community was put in America alone, if they were put alongside nations of the world, when it comes to their income, to what the black community as a whole makes, here, okay, it's loaded. Let me see. Okay, here it is. This is in Walter Williams. He's an African-American economist. He says, black Americans compared with, and by the way, this book is called Race and Economics, How Much Can Be Blamed on Discrimination. Black Americans, compared with any other racial group, have come the greatest distance over some of the highest hurdles in a shorter period of time. This unprecedented progress can be verified through several measures. If one were to total black earnings, financial earnings, and consider black Americans a separate nation, he would find that in 2008, 1 year, they earned $726 billion. That would make them the world's 16th richest nation, just behind Turkey but ahead of Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Switzerland. Black Americans in the United States of America alone are richer than many, many countries. And they're up there with some of the wealthiest nations per capita in the world. So, that's just another thing. You wouldn't think that the black community in the United States of America would make that kind of progress from the 1860s through the 1950s and 60s. I know we're making some leaps. To now, if indeed there was still some form of oppression being leveraged upon them in light of the numbers that we just talked about. But the biggest problem is that I don't have a problem with someone contesting these figures. If someone wants to say, well, there are certain reasons why these statistics don't count toward your reasoning, okay, let's go there, and then we can talk about that, and we can reason about that. We can argue about it, civilly, of course. But we're not even getting there. We're not even getting to, let's talk about these statistics that are out here that nobody addresses. Nobody wants to talk about them. Nobody wants to talk about things like this. And the fact of the matter is that, yeah, I actually believe, and I can say to a large extent, that this type of, when you see the social decline from 100 years after slavery until now, I can say that there's racism involved there. But I can also tell you that it's not, at least generally, it's not coming from the conservative Christians. It's coming from the liberal ideology and the imposition of their worldview on the black community. From the liberal ideology being pressed upon the black community. Well, that's how it's always been. It was the liberals, it was the Democratic Party that was huge in the encouragement of slavery, in the encouragement of segregation in the 1950s and 60s. Now, I'm not trying to make this into a two-sided Democrats, Republicans. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I try to evaluate politics from a biblical worldview, and oftentimes that prevents me from identifying with with any political party, Libertarian, Republican, whatever. But the mindset within the Democratic Party, and even some within the Republican Party, I see a liberal mindset, especially today, by many in the Republican Party, because they have no foundational, they have no basis to ground their morals in, so they're kind of all over the place when you look at it really closely. But it's been the Democratic Party which has historically, and especially now, houses and cultivates the liberal mindset. Just is. I'm not a political expert. I'm not a political science major, but there's a history to that, I'm sure. It'd be interesting to study. But all that to say is that there are things to consider that are not even being allowed to be brought up. And that's a problem. So this is the last installment. This is it. I may talk about this more later, but for right now, this is it. I'm going to move on to other things. Got a debate coming up in June. Hopefully, you'll all be able to tune into that. It's going to be here in Kansas City. Overland Park, to be exact. So, God bless you guys. Hope you enjoyed this series. I hope you'll enjoy kind of looking through some of the stuff that I've done on race as it relates to our theology. When I put it all in one place, I'll let you know on the Facebook page. The Baptist Reformation Facebook page is where you get all of our latest updates. God bless.